Impeachment inquiry is underway, sparked by a complaint from someone within the intelligence community. It feeds the president's concern and often used term about a deep state being there to take him out.
Thank God for the deep state.
What is the deep state? Since the moment Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, he's been met with a resistance. I'd like to talk today not about the hashtag resistance, that is the average Americans who may oppose the Trump presidency, but instead the people working within the government to undermine its leader.
So I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter.
This is a regrettable characteristic of President Trump, where he will attack people who whom he considers a threat.
I just find that outrageous, and it's something that I think that Mr. Trump should be ashamed of, but it doesn't seem as though anything he does, he feels any shame whatsoever.
Who are these people? Don't they work for the president? And how is it that they feel so invulnerable that they can actively seek to undermine him? To understand something as mysterious as the deep state, it's important first to define the term.
These are career individuals who essentially have learned how to use the tools of state for their own personal political objectives.
It is not fair to this president in terms of the leaks. Whether you like President Trump or not, no president can do business if their phone calls are going to be leaked to the Washington Post. So I hope Jeff Sessions can do something about the leaking, because it's really hurting the president.
The concept of a deep state refers, in the popular imagination, to a group of unelected officials who work within the intelligence community and who have the power to frustrate or subvert a sitting president of the United States, maybe even to evict one.
There are elements of the intelligence community, as there are cultures in a lot of departments of government, that I think are fundamentally hostile to the Trump worldview.
A lot of these people cannot be fired, and they consistently leak damaging information about him, and so he's very frustrated.
It was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake. I think it's a disgrace that information that was false and fake and never happened got released to the public.
But the concept of the deep state did not originate in American politics. Sagar Enjeti is the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller.
The phrase deep state is actually one that we came up with to describe what goes on in places like Egypt and Turkey. So, you have entrenched bureaucracies that are within Turkey. They overthrew their democratically elected governments multiple times. So the same thing happened in Egypt. You had President Mubarak, who had been there for almost 50 years in power, and you had bureaucrats who amassed total power in certain areas where nobody could really overrule them.
Meanwhile, in the United States, the deep state has a well-documented history of spying on the sitting American president. James Rosen is an award-winning investigative reporter who has written books on both Watergate and the Bush-Cheney era.
Those elements of a deep state, which cohere in the popular imagination, were very much on display in the Nixon presidency. An exhaustive volume of scholarship shows that the Nixon White House and the Nixon Campaign Committee were infiltrated by various power centers across official Washington, with the perpetrators of this infiltration being the military, specifically the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the FBI, specifically under J. Edgar Hoover, CIA, as has been found by numerous official investigations and various authors. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, most audaciously, used a Navy stenographer who was assigned to the liaison office between the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council, run by Henry Kissinger, to spy on Nixon and Kissinger by rifling Kissinger's briefcase on overnight flights, going through burn bags, going through carbon crumples of the time, and so forth. And through this means, this Navy stenographer delivered, covertly, 5,000 classified documents from the Nixon-Kissinger NSC to the hands of the Joint Chiefs of Staff across 13 months in wartime. It's called the Moore-Radford Affair. And the Moore-Radford Affair is one of the most serious constitutional crises of the Cold War. And it's an overlooked one, because here you had the top military commanders in uniform in this country actively spying on their civilian leadership, the President and the National Security Advisor at the White House. That sounds rather like a deep state to most sane folks.
Who's in charge in Washington? You ask most people that question, they'll say either the president or the Congress. But there are some people in this town who have other ideas.
You have people who have entrenched interests, who have lived here and been around the block for 30, 40 years. They know where the bodies are buried, and they know how to outmaneuver you. And the best part is that because of, lack of bureaucratic reform, you can't fire them.
This is a Fox News alert. Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation may be wrapping up. That's according to White House attorney Ty Cobb. And we're getting new details tonight on 10,000 text messages between FBI agent Peter Strzok, who was taken off the Mueller investigation, and Strzok's alleged mistress, an FBI lawyer named Lisa Page. Kristen Fisher is here following the late-breaking developments as we got these tonight, pouring through and finding out exactly what these two were talking about.
Last March, so right in the middle of the campaign, Page said, "God, Trump is a loathsome human." Strzok replied, "Yet he may win." He then said, "Would he be a worse president than Cruz?" Page replied, "Trump? Yes, I think so," to which Strzok said, "I'm not sure. OMG, he's an idiot." Now, later that same day, Strzok said, "God, Hillary should win 100 million to 0. And about a month later, Page texted him, "So look, you say we text on that phone when we talk about Hillary because it can't be traced." So Page appears to be acknowledging they know they're doing something that shouldn't be done, or at the very least, something that they don't want traced.
Polling shows that an overwhelming majority of Americans believe that a deep state exists, and that it's secretly manipulating or directing national policy.
An event that feeds suspicions of a deep state in contemporary times would be James Comey's admission that after he was fired by President Trump, he used personal connections with a professor to leak confidential FBI memos that he had made of his discussions with the President of the United States. Whatever checks and balances are to exist against the executive, the framers laid out long ago and quite well. And it probably shouldn't fall to unelected members of the intelligence community whose names we might never know, or if we knew, recognize, to exercise that authority or arrogate that authority unto themselves.
Tony Shaffer has decades of experience working with the intelligence community in the United States government. He's a former intelligence analyst and a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel.
The problem is this, is that I think there is elements of the government, there are elements of the government who are willing to bend the political will of the American people in ways that the American people don't necessarily understand. That's what's frightening. There are, again, capabilities that I'm aware of that would truly frighten the American people. That's why it's so important, so vitally important. You have people who have an ethical understanding of what needs to be done or not done relating to their oath of office. If you lack that core, if you lack that devotion and commitment to the American people, you have great potential for abuse, and that's what I think we all have to need to be focused on.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
It's collecting the phone records of every single customer of Verizon Business and finding out every single call that they've made internationally and locally. So it's indiscriminate and it's sweeping. It's a government program designed to collect information about all Americans, not just people where they believe there's reason to think they've done anything wrong.
All of the elements of that entity that looked a lot like a deep state during Nixon's time are still present, and their potency perhaps only enhanced by the rise of big data.
There's individuals in the deep state who will completely outright lie to create a certain perception for a specific gain. You've been a member of the media for a long time. For you to run with single source reporting on any issue, it has to come from someone very senior who you have every confidence is telling you the truth. Otherwise, you need to have 2 or 3 sources.
The only way a member of the press would be confident in a single source is if they were unimpeachable.
Precisely. And that's how scary this is. You have unimpeachable sources, always who are above reproach, going out and putting things to the media for purposes of disruption and deceit. That's how the deep state has been able to do the disruption it has. And never have I seen in my 30 years here doing this sort of thing such a willingness of the media to completely lay down and take single source reporting from very senior, unimpeachable sources so willingly and be so wrong consistently.
In a world full of threats, Americans need an intelligence community. But in an industry defined by secrecy, how do we hold that community accountable? Whose interests do they have at heart? Not even the President of the United States knows the answer to that question, but we suspect he will soon enough. For the Daily Caller, I'm Ms. Colonnade.